everyone. I hope you can hear me using this mic, but for this presentation I'm going to give you a general overview of the project, and I'm aware that as you're here, most of you probably are aware of some of the things, especially the first few things that I'm going to go through, but we wanted to make sure that we're all on the same page, and we're also going to update you on some future plans and key dates for storytellers and respondents, so please don't tune out, I suppose. The Royce's project aims to change the law in relation to legal capacity, and the right to legal capacity is the right to make decisions which have legal consequences and to have those decisions respected by the law. Now, as you've heard from Amita earlier and from the panel, this is found in Article 12 of the UN CRPD. I won't go into the background of the right in this presentation, but if you're interested in reading more about it or hearing about some of the other papers that we've written for the project, you can see them on our blog, ercvoices.com, and it's there on the back of each of your packs as well. The working papers are all available there. There's a working paper on the current state of the art following Article 12. It addresses some of the developments and criticisms. There is a working paper on legal agency, one on state intervention, and one on consent, and those will form the basis of Eleanor and Liz's presentations later today. So this project takes an innovative approach to legal research by placing the focus on the lived experience or stories of the people with disabilities and people who have, real life experience interacting with these things on a daily basis. It compared these people with lived experience, which were we just calling storytellers, with respondents. And respondents could be legal academics, practitioners, activists, social science scholars, and basically anyone who has an interest in this area. And they will work together to produce pieces for a book at the end of the project. We're excited to say that all of those storytellers and respondents are selected. They are all here in the room with us today, and we were delighted with the level of diversity of experience that we now have brought together for the project, and who are also the level of interest in the applications and what we got. So, key dates and what we're doing from here. We started work on this project last June, and we started developing those theoretical framework pieces that I've just mentioned and putting together our website and things, and then we had our first conference in February in Dublin, and we were delighted with how that went. And today then is our first workshop, so it's where the storytellers and respondents are meeting each other. It's happening today and tomorrow, as all workshops will be a 2-day process. The first day is a public day, conference-style event, as you all can see. And tomorrow then is a private day just for storytellers and respondents. After this, then, there are 4 thematic workshops. The next one will be on criminal responsibility or experiences with the police and criminal law. And tentatively, we're proposing the week of the 12th or the 19th of September for that workshop. And particularly, we're asking storytellers and respondents who think they might be coming to this with each particular workshop to look at these dates and tell us, can you make it? Is there some reason why we need to change these dates or look at alternatives? The next one then will be on contractual capacity or buying and selling things, signing a lease to rent a house, all those types of things. And that we're proposing for the week of the 7th or the 11th of November this year. So the week starting the 7th or the week starting the 11th of November. The next workshop then will be on consent, as you can see here from our slide, and that will be early next year in 2017. Again, we're proposing the week of the 13th of February for people who might be interested in that topic. Finally, our 4th thematic workshop is still with an open theme, because we're hoping that based on some of the different stories that are coming forward in this project, the work that we're going to do together tomorrow, and what comes through in some of your feedback, we'll then pick the theme of this workshop. Or it could possibly be consent part 2, because we realise that fitting both consent to treatment and consent to sex into that February one might just be too much of a push. So the final workshop, that open theme one, we're suggesting for the week of the 8th of May. The other workshop that we have up there is workshop 6 for November 2017, the book workshop. That at the moment we don't have a tentative date for. We're not quite that organised just yet. But pencil it in, and this will be a meeting of all the storytellers and all the respondents back in the same room for that final time to work through the book and to do some edits and bring everything together. And then we'll have our concluding conference and book launch, hopefully, with all the pieces in October 2018. Okay, so the types of stories that we can expect across the project. Those types of stories are very, very closely linked to the types of workshops that I've just mentioned. They are stories about contracts, buying or selling things, signing leases, all those types of things, criminal responsibility. They're stories about consent, both consent to treatment or relationships, and or consent to sex and relationships. And stories that are coming forward from other people that we don't have up there, but are also connected to making decisions, getting support with making decisions, having your decisions respected by the law. And there are also things about moving out, possibly, or making decisions about travelling and these types of things. Alright, so I've told you that storytellers and respondents are picked, but don't worry, if you miss the deadlines, there's still some ways to get involved. We have storytellers and respondents are two of the main roles in the project, but we also have roles for what we're calling participants. And participants are people who have some of those stories. So you have a story about making a decision that wasn't respected, getting support to make a decision. And that's a story that you're thinking is interesting and that you want to share with us. And we're interested in these stories to record, to get you to write a piece, to post it on our blog, and to share it in the project generally, possibly to come to one of our workshops like you see people do today and share their own lived experience. We're also interested in artists, performers, writers, poets, and as you see later on today, the project is really including a strong core element of different ways to tell stories and the power of stories in creating social change. So we want to include some form of art, be it a performance piece, a dance recital, something, right, in each of the workshops. Our main criteria is it has to be able to come to us, right? We have to be able to bring it into the building so people can see it. And it also has to be something that is connected with the main themes of the project. Be that each of the 4 thematic workshops and the stories that we're talking about, contracts, personal responsibility and consent, or the general theme of being treated like a person and decision making. It needs to have a strong link to some of these things. Okay, so storytellers, as you're here today, you've probably already agreed to this, but I'll give people a general overview of what you've committed to and what you can expect going forward. We're asking people to attend workshop 1 today. One of the four thematic workshops, your choice, or the one that connects best with the story you want to share, and the final book editing workshop. You're committing to working closely with the respondent who you get to meet over the 2 days and hopefully have picked your ideal respondent. And you're committing to have people work with you on your story and edit it so it can be suitable for a book. Respondents are following a very, very similar set of rules. They're working with the storyteller, obviously. The storytellers are guiding the pairing process mostly, so respondents might not get their ideal storyteller if the storytellers pick them, but we're going to do our utmost to facilitate that people get exactly who they would like to work with. And finally, as I said, participants in the project take part in discussions, turn up to our workshops, tell us your stories. We would love to put these stories on our blog, and we would love to share them in some way. You can fill in an expression of interest form on our website to do this. You can email us at ERC Voices, or you can mention it to us here today at the desk or something, but ideally please put it in writing because we may not remember everything. And that's it. We hope to see you again at another of our events. Thanks.
Okay, that's great and really on time as well, Cliona. Thanks very much. I knew I could depend on you. Now, for a session on exercising legal agency, we're delighted to have Christina Burke with Eleanor. And Christina is a service user with the Brothers of Charity, and she lives independently. She's the Assistant Secretary of the National Platform of Self-Advocates, and she's also a member of Inclusive Research Network. She sits on a number of other committees. And Eleanor, we've already introduced, so you know who she is, and they're going to talk to us about legal capacity. Okay?
So Christina's going to go first and going to give her presentation about her experiences, and then I'm going to try to make some of the things Christina talks about relevant for some of the ideas we're developing in the project. So, ready?
So, my name is Christina Burke. No, my name is Christina Burke. I'm a service user with the Welfare Charity, the Independent Living program, and I am very happy to be here today. I'm on a lot of committees, including the National Platform for Self-Advocates, and Assistant Secretary for that, and I'm a member of the Iran Inclusive Research, and I'm chairperson of the National Advocacy Council. I am assistant chairperson of the Galway Service Users Council, and also I'm a member of the National Anti-Bullying Committee. That's what this includes. This lady does workshops for people that are being bullied. I have worked with Inclusion Ireland as well. When I was sent away, when I was 4, I was sent to an institution in Limerick. The GP was the only person my mother could turn to. He told my mother that was the best place for me. I lived in a big institution miles away from my home in Ballinslaw. I went to school on the campus. It was run by the nuns in River Street. It was in the dormitory with about 20 other girls. Every day was the same. We all got up together, all went to school, all ate dinner, and all went to bed at the same time. We got to play in the playground on the grounds. We never went into town. During the summer, I got to go home for a few days. My mother was always great at writing letters. I never had visitors. My family never came to visit me. We had no ties. I had one tie, which was a pin doll I got from another girl. I still have it. As a teenager, I worked in the training center when I learned local hairdressing, did contact work, nation, so on, and worked and woodwork, which was my favorite. Outside people came in to teach us the skills. There were always women. I still lived in the dormitory with 20 women. During this time, a nice man came and did up the place. We then had cubicles where we slept in with two people sharing. She also bought me clothes and bought me a suitcase. I was chosen to go on 2 holidays to Fiji and Ballycon. I remember winning a home economics competition for my cooking and went to Cork at the regional finals. Then I went to Dublin for the big one. I won an award from President Neely's wife. The nice nun bought me out to buy an outfit. I remember having a lovely 21st birthday, and after that I moved to Galway. But world around us, we always got up at the same time every day, around 7, and we always went to bed before 9. They would shout, "Get up." We never got the privilege of watching television, going to the movies or reading the paper. We had no say in what we ate, and we never got a chance to cook. I was always called Miss Christina Burke, really pronounced my name wrong. I was on Tiger Street today. A day when I came to Galway, they were reduced. There was a lot of nuns and nurses, and you had to go to Mass every time. We were never allowed beyond the walls unless we were on a bus trip. I never had money. I never had a bank account or handed money until I came to the Brothers of Church at the age of 21. Our clothes were laid out the night before. I didn't have many clothes. We had no say in what we wore. We did not have my own room. 20 of us slept in the dormitory. We had no say in any activities or where we went. And rules were broken. We did break rules, but sometimes I was told I was the troublemaker. My punishment was to clean and go on to bed early with no food. If you were called into the office, the punishment was to get down on your knees and it was the floor. What is like now, I live independently. I advise my opinions, orders to make their lives better. I am still battling for equality for all. I meet a lot of politicians and senators to get them to change the law and make better policies. I control my own money. I choose my activities, my friends, my holidays, my clothes, everything. My family intervene too much, and there should be boundaries in place for me to live the life I choose, not what other people want. I would like to visit the Harvest and Orchard, the White House and United many other countries. I'm in my own apartment now, and life has blossomed.
Thanks very much, Christina. It's going to be hard to follow that, but I'll do my best. I think we're going to take questions at the end of our bit, right? So if you want to sit for a while. Okay, great. Off. I think. Okay, so I'm going to try to make some arguments now about how some of the ideas that Christina talked about from her own experience are relevant to what we call legal agency. I know this is kind of a technical term, but I'm trying to explain it in as clear a way as I can, and of course we'll take questions at the end if people have them. So why are we interested in this thing called legal agency? Well, we're interested in it because Article 12 of the UN Convention, which you've already heard about today, protects the right to legal capacity on an equal basis with others for people with disabilities. And what does legal capacity really mean? In the debates that Amita referred to this morning, while the convention was being drafted, there was a lot of discussions about this. Did legal capacity just mean the right to be a person in the law, or does it also mean the right to make decisions that the law has to respect? And some countries argued that it should only mean that you're a person in the law, but that doesn't mean you get the right to make your own decision. And lots of other countries, and of course civil society, responded by saying really clearly that it is both. You cannot be a person before the law unless the law respects the decisions that you make. So these two concepts of being a person, a legal person, and having legal agency or exercising your agency are both part of what it means to have the right to legal capacity. When we started working on this project, we found that quite a lot had been written about who is a legal person. And for example, there are now developments in court cases around the world where we allow companies to be legal persons. There is even developments about whether animals can sometimes be legal persons, or whether things in nature, like rivers, can have certain rights. So there's a lot of writing about that, but there was less writing about when is someone exercising legal agency. It was just sort of assumed that you just have to be a legal person, and once you're a legal person, you can exercise legal agency. So we wanted to go a little bit deeper into what that exercising legal agency means. So, for example, when Christina talks about having to go to bed at a certain time, or having no say in what you wear or what you eat, if you refuse to go to bed at that time, or you refuse to wear those clothes, or you refuse to eat what's given to you, then are you actually exercising legal agency by doing that? Or is something else going on? Is that just something that's outside of the law altogether? So that's what we were trying to uncover in this paper, and you can read our ideas about it in more detail on the website, as Cliona mentioned. So we had this instinct, and again, Elizabeth referred to this in talking about the context in Kenya, that there are situations where a lot of people with disabilities live where they're very tightly controlled. Their lives are very tightly controlled by others, whether that's their families or whether it's the state or service providers. So we wanted to explore what was happening in those places to think about whether they're really exercising legal agency. And we used this theory from Republican philosophy of domination, to understand, is someone really free if they're being dominated by the people around them, or the structures or the systems in place around them? And what would be required to make them more free? We also wanted to combat this fear that many people have about how far Article 12 goes. Because when we talk to governments and law reformers around the world about this right, they're saying, you mean that I get to choose, if I don't get to choose what I have for breakfast, that's a denial of my human rights? Surely that can't be right. So we wanted to figure out where the line should be drawn. And here's the definition that we've come up with for the project. We call legal agency an action or inaction, so failure to act, that the person intends, which either has a legal consequence, or creates, modifies, or extinguishes a legal relationship. So if I do an act, and that act has a legal consequence, so like signing a contract has a clear legal consequence, it also establishes a legal relationship, that's really clear. But sometimes people are doing acts or forgetting to do acts, and those forgettings or acts might actually have legal consequences. And if you do any of those things, we would say you are exercising legal agency, and therefore you are covered by Article 12 and protected by the right to legal capacity. We've also heard a lot this morning about the dangers of focusing too much on rationality and cognition, because really what drives humans is feeling and emotion. But the law loves rationality, and it loves to think that it can prove whether people really understand what they're doing or not. And as we all know, there are lots of decisions we take with legal consequences, like the decision to get married, for example, that perhaps people don't fully understand all the possible consequences before they enter it. So this focus on understanding is maybe a little bit looking in the wrong direction. So we wanted to not have a test of understanding in our definition of legal agency. So we said there is no requirement of understanding, because the law already recognises that people can exercise legal agency without really understanding what they're doing, and we'll still hold them responsible for that. But there has to be some intention there. So it doesn't have to be that high level of understanding, but I have to somehow intend what I'm doing. So if I intend to fling my arms out in front of me, but I don't intend to hurt anyone, but as it happens, I'm standing in a crowd, and so I do hurt people, then I intended the action, so I don't have to intend the consequences in order to be held responsible. So that's how we try to separate understanding and intention. To go back to some of the situations that Christina described in her story, we acknowledge that people with disabilities face decision-making barriers every day that a lot of other people don't face. And those barriers come from different places. They can come from the law, and people don't often even recognise or know when the law is affecting their lives in this way. They can come from family members, they can come from service providers, and they're really, really obvious if somebody is in an institutional setting, because there are a lot of barriers in their way if they want to make their own decision. If I decide I want to go for a walk in the evening from my own home, there's no barrier necessarily in my way to doing that. But if I decided I wanted to leave an institution after the time that I was supposed to go to bed, there would be a lot of barriers in my way, and the law might even enter my decision in a way that it wouldn't enter it if I didn't live in that place. So that brings us back to this idea about relationships of domination. We're all interdependent on each other, and we all rely on each other to different extents. We rely on our friends, our family, our peers, our colleagues to look out for us, to keep us safe, to support us, to help us to achieve what we want. But sometimes those relationships can become a little bit oppressive, and we wanted to acknowledge that. And we call that kind of oppression a form of domination, or saying that the person is now in a state of domination. And it's really important to get out of that state of domination if we really want people to have the freedom that they're entitled to. Being dominated, it erodes the person's possibility to participate in community and public life. So how do you know if you're being dominated or not? We talk about two main things that need to be present. So first, you're in a situation of dependency. So you're dependent on someone to respect your decision or to give you the choice that you want. So that's one part. But just because you're dependent on others doesn't mean you're dominated. What makes you dominated is when that person who you're dependent on is exercising arbitrary power over you. So what does that mean? It means that there's no one controlling them. There's nobody watching them to decide when they interfere with your life. And that power is exercised based on their whim, and it's not constrained by external forces. But even the law itself can be a form of arbitrary power. When we talk about assessments of mental capacity and the functional test of mental capacity, I would argue that that is a form of exercising arbitrary power, because one person can pass the test one day and fail the test the next day on the exact same issue with the exact same supports around them. So the decision about whether someone should be allowed to take a decision or not is often very, very arbitrary. So where does that bring us back to in thinking about people with disabilities and their experience? We think that where people are in relationships of domination, they are forced to exercise legal agency to try to get their decisions respected, in a way that I don't have to exercise my legal agency to decide to go for a walk this evening, but I would have to exercise legal agency if I was in a nursing home where security would be called, or the guards might even be called if I tried to leave without permission. So people with disabilities are disproportionately experiencing this kind of dependency and domination, and therefore have to exercise their legal agency at a higher rate than the rest of the population. So our conclusion on this is that there are many areas that don't look obvious. So in choosing what to eat or in choosing what to wear, people might actually be exercising legal agency because the consequences of their decisions might have legal effect. And therefore, when they're doing that, they are protected by the right to legal capacity, and they must therefore have the support they require to exercise that legal capacity. And we believe this is covered by Article 12. So I'll stop there, and I think we have time for a few questions. Okay, thanks.
Thanks very much.
And just echoing just a question that was raised earlier.
I didn't prepare any PowerPoint presentation, so I'm a person with lived experience of a lot of forms of forced psychiatric interventions. At age 16, I did a suicide attempt, and then they called me a danger to myself. So they put me in this institution with locked doors, and then I didn't like that. So I tried another attempt, and then they put me in solitary confinement to protect me, so to say. But of course, this was a totally horrible experience, and it only made it worse. So I couldn't live like that. And again, I tried to commit suicide. So they added more and more forced measures. I was restrained, I was secluded, I was forcefully drugged, I was even sexually violated. I had like terrible experience. This lasted 2 years. And by the time I was 18, I was also, because they didn't listen to my voice. Also when I was having health issues, medical issues, they didn't listen. So I was also medically neglected. And then when this came out, they closed this particular ward and they put me in another city, in another ward. Again, a completely strange surrounding where I didn't really feel good. But at this new institution, they didn't lock me up all the time. So then they gave me a little bit of freedom and I could walk around. Then I met some other people and I kind of got a life. And then I decided to leave the institution. But the psychiatrist was not supporting that. And he said, like, I hadn't finished my treatment, according to them. But still, I left without support. And then I was homeless for about 2.5 years. When I was a young girl, age 18, 19, 20. And I thought I had a great life at that point because I was no longer solitary confined. I was wearing my clothes. I didn't have to take the drugs that I didn't want. So I had achieved freedom. And I thought for me this was the only way to get out. So I was happy being homeless, which is like not a very common story. And then, well, I find a place to live and I started studying. And then, of course, I was still upset about all the harm that has been done to me. And then I found out that this is still happening and I got like a text message saying that a young boy in the same institution as where I had been was put in solitary confinement for taking the dessert from his room, from the table to his room, which was not allowed. And the Netherlands has a high rate of using solitary confinement. So they put this boy in there. I got this message. I was so upset. I went to the place, but I didn't know what to do. I felt powerless. And in my mind, I was thinking about public prosecution. But of course, that's a legal thing. You need lawyers, and lawyers are not understanding. And so then I decided to make it public myself. And I went to the supermarket and I bought a pile of papers and a big fat marker. And I made some slogans, which I copied. And I hung them all around in the place of the institution, just in the community. And then the next day, this was in the newspaper as an anonymous protest against seclusion in child psychiatry. And then I thought, oh, this is working. So I became an activist. And I started an NGO in the Netherlands around 2002, 2003. And then the CRPD came, which was really welcome. And by now I'm a board member of the European Network of Users and Survivors of Psychiatry. And I'm also a co-chair of the World Network of Users and Survivors of Psychiatry. And well, along the way, of course, I also got involved in a lot of projects, a lot of committees. And then around 2008, I was invited for the Dutch law reform on forced psychiatric treatments. And it's good to notice that the Netherlands still has not ratified the CRPD, which is really strange considering the legacy of the Netherlands. So this is, yeah, the government changed, so yeah, this is politics. And, but the law reform was very much in the old paradigm. So I sent them all the CRPD materials, but they didn't listen. And then at that point I thought, I can't expect them to come up with great ideas because they simply don't understand. So I thought, I have to make my own ideas. And luckily, I studied as an engineer, so I know how to approach like the stages of problem solving, design, develop, deliver. And then, well, I made my analysis, and I came to an alternative model, because the current law on forced treatment, it focuses on when to intervene by force. When is the situation bad enough to intervene by force? So, like, there is a mental disorder and a risk for harm, and then those two things, they result in forced treatments. But according to me, the question should be, how can you help somebody who is in a crisis situation? Which is a completely different question with a completely different answer. So how can you help people? And, well, I come from a family with a lot of, with a variety of the disabilities, psychosocial, intellectual. And so I could relate from the family perspective, from the user perspective. And then I found this model, which comes from New Zealand. It's called family group conferencing, which basically means that when you have any question or issue in life, you invite your friends or the people close to you, maybe your family, maybe anybody, maybe your teacher or football coach, and you put the question on the table and you think together, because together you know much more than alone. And if everybody can contribute their ideas, then maybe there's something that will solve your problem. And this is like this family group conferencing. It started in childcare services to prevent state interventions, because in New Zealand the states took away a lot of children and put them in institutions. Of course, this caused a lot of trouble, and they decided to change the situation. And so the state then asked, like, because this was about the Maori population, they asked, how would you solve it? And then the Maori population came up with their own ideas who fit with their culture. And they said, oh, we want to raise up our own children. And they found a way to do that, and the state agreed. And then there was no more need for the state to take away the children. And so, because people have the right to make their own plan before somebody else makes another plan for them, this is like the basic principle of family group conferencing. People should be enabled to make a plan together with the people they trust before somebody else says, oh, you're incapable of doing anything. So this family group conferencing is a potential alternative to enable supported decision-making around any question. And yeah, the law reform in the Netherlands, unfortunately, didn't move in the CRPD direction, but we managed to secure one point, which is that indeed, when state interventions are considered, like forced psychiatric interventions, people should have the chance to make their own plan and be facilitated to make that plan, and they shouldn't be left alone to make that plan, but like family group conferencing, or there's more ways to have help and support to make your own plan and to identify what you really want. And this is going to be the first step in this very bad law. So that's basically it.
Can't get rid of me. So thanks so much to Jolijn. That was really perfect in terms of leading into what I want to talk about. So as you said, Jolijn, really well, I think the wrong question is being asked in the law. The law up until now has asked, when can we intervene to force people to have things that they don't want? And so for this project, we wanted to think about when anyone should intervene in a very different way. So going back to Amita's idea that we all need protection in our lives at some point, and at a lot of points, but the sources of that protection and the way in which that protection is provided will be radically different if we really believe that people ultimately have the right to self-determination. So that was our starting point for this question. The reason we talk about the state, even though from Jolijn's story, from many other people's experiences that we've heard about today, the state has a very long history of being coercive and intervening in the private lives of adults, and in this project we're really focused on adults, in a really negative way. But we wanted to think about the state still, because when we talk about human rights, we talk about the responsibility of the state towards its citizens. So we need to still talk about the state. There's no getting away from that. And the other reason for approaching this question is always the question from the people who disagree with this approach when you present it to legislators, to governments in other countries. We talk about Article 12 gives people full freedom and rights to make their own decisions, and immediately everyone goes to, what about when people make decisions that are really putting themselves in a very risky position, that are really leading to harm to themselves and to others? Is there no way the state can intervene in those situations? So we wanted to explore that idea, to think about an intervention that is supportive and not coercive, and an intervention that respects the person's human rights and doesn't violate them. So I won't spend long on the critique of the existing system, because I think Jolijn's experience really demonstrates it. One way in which the state is coercive right now is enforced psychiatric treatment, but there are other ways for the state to be coercive in the lives of people with disabilities. Many countries have things that they call adult protection orders or safeguarding orders, and often those are things that really only apply to people with disabilities, or they might apply to specific groups of people with disabilities, like people with intellectual disabilities, or even to older people and people with dementia. And what the purpose of these orders is to intervene in the person's life at a time when it has been determined by someone that they are not making a decision that keeps them safe, that they're making a decision that puts themselves at risk or in harm's way. But funnily enough, lots of us make decisions that put ourselves at risk and in harm's way, and we don't experience this kind of intervention in our lives. So we notice that there's a clear pattern of discrimination on the basis of disability, and by that we also mean discrimination on the basis of a perceived disability, even when the person wouldn't self-identify as a person with a disability. Sometimes these safeguarding orders just talk about vulnerable people, and they don't talk about disability. So we would call that facially neutral. But again, if you look at who is most likely to have a safeguarding order applied to them, once again we see it's people with disabilities. These orders and the coercion that the state allows to happen here really gives a wide range of powers to the state to intervene, and usually these powers get activated at the point where harm has not yet happened to the person. So we're intervening in a way that actually causes harm before the harm we're worried about has even happened. The other problem is that they tend to punish the person who's experiencing a dangerous situation rather than the cause of that situation. So I might be being abused in my home by a family member, and sometimes these protection orders are used to remove me from that situation, the person who is experiencing it, rather than the perpetrator. So we argue in this paper, which again you can read in full on the Voices blog, that there are other options available to the state. We have public health powers, we have the criminal law, especially if people are harming others. That's the route that should be followed. And we also found that there were some examples of good practice in areas where the state intervenes in the lives of people who are not people with disabilities. So, for example, we looked at people who survive human trafficking or survivors of domestic violence. And when the state intervenes in their lives, it generally does so with their consent, outside of the criminal law, because the criminal law does not intervene in a way that requires the person's consent. But if we're going to offer that person in that dangerous situation support, we can't force it upon them. There's been a lot of people writing about how we should rethink the way we protect people now that we have Article 12. And two of the most famous people who've written about this would be Michael Bach and Lana Kersner from Canada. So they describe the situation where they believe the state should intervene to protect people as what they call a situation of serious adverse effects. And the full definition is on the slide, but basically it involves where someone is at risk for one of the following reasons. They're about to lose a lot of their money or their property. They're not providing for their other family members or for themselves. They are seriously ill and they're experiencing a deprivation of their liberty or personal security. They are threatening or attempting to cause harm to themselves, or they're behaving violently towards another person and causing that person to fear harm. I'm not going to explain their full, approach here now, but you can read more about it. They use this idea of when the state should step in and stop the person from making these decisions to only apply to people who need support in the first place to exercise their legal capacity. So if I can exercise my legal capacity on my own without support, and I'm doing one of these things, then no one should intervene in my bad decision. However, if I'm using support, Michael Bach and Lana Kersner have said that's the time that the state should intervene. So again, we would depart from that in our work and take a different approach. We suggest that when someone is in a crisis and they're desperately in need of support, how do we know when that moment has arrived? The definition that we use, but this is a first approach and we're certainly open to feedback on this, is that someone is in desperate need of support when there is imminent and grave harm occurring to their life, health or safety. And that's where the state should have a responsibility to reach out to that person and offer them support, not coercion. So that creates enough power for the state to access the person in the first place, to try to figure out what's going on with the person and what supports in the community, for example, could be provided to them. So it gives that power to intervene and approach the person and ask them what's wrong and start to figure it out together. But it doesn't give you the power to do whatever you like to the person. So then we rely on what we call a proportionality test to decide whether whether the intervention is happening in the correct way. So it's not enough to be able to say, okay, now the person's life is in danger, so the state's going to intervene. We also need to think about what happens at that moment and how does the state intervene is the most important question. So we use a proportionality test here, even though I, and I'm sure lots of the rest of you, might be a bit sceptical about proportionality and the way in which it's been used, because it's a big word for a very fluffy concept. And people have used proportionality to justify all sorts of interventions and intrusions on people's privacy that I would personally not feel are proportionate. So we tried to set out at the beginning that there are certain kinds of responses that the state might make that we as the Voices research team do not feel are ever appropriate responses to this risk of harm, and we include forced medication and forced feeding in that. But we talk about how do we know if something is proportionate? It's pursuing a legitimate aim, and that aim should be to protect the person's human rights. It's a proportionate response, so it's the best way to respond to that risk. And I think the example that Jolijn gave of family group conferencing is a really good example of what a proportionate response might look like. But in the paper, we also talk about other options like open dialogue in mental health and circles of support that people have created in the community as being, those are proportionate responses to someone who's experiencing distress or in a crisis. This is a part of the paper that we debated a lot in the team, but for now, I suppose, came to this idea of needing to create a power of entry for the state, because I was worried about situations where people might be isolated and segregated even within their own homes. So imagine a situation where a support worker comes to the door of a family home and they want to see the mother in that home. And the son answers the door, an adult son, and he says, "No, my mother doesn't want to see you, and she's fine, and I'm taking good care of her." You don't have any information that that woman's life is at risk, that her health is in danger, that her safety is in danger, but you might have signs that make you nervous. So you might hear from other people that they've been blocked entry to the house as well, that the mother used to go to mass every Sunday and she hasn't been seen for a long time. So there might be other signs that something is going wrong and that the person in that home might not be making her own decision and might need some support, might be in a state of domination even. So I thought about what should happen in that situation, and I think where there is a real sense that the person is in need of support and assistance, and they are experiencing, we have information to believe they're experiencing abuse, neglect or coercion, there should be a power for the state to at least enter and gain access to that person in order to ascertain if they're okay. Now, if the social support worker gets in and meets the mother and the mother says, "I'm fine, go away," then of course we should respect that. But it's just to make sure that people aren't abandoned in these situations. And I think that's a big fear of people who are nervous about what Article 12 means, that if we give people the right to make decisions, that we're abandoning them to their bad decisions and we're not giving them the support that they need. Oh, that's it. Thanks.